Claire had been folding laundry in the kitchen when the doorbell rang. It was nearly 7 p.m., that in-between hour when the sun dipped low and everything felt still. Her husband, Mark, was in the den with his laptop, like always. Tay didn't talk much anymore, just quiet check-ins about groceries, the dog, or bills. The kind of routine that slowly became distance. When the doorbell rang again, Claire reached for a dish towel, expecting a delivery. But Mark moved faster than usual, already halfway to the door. "I got it," he said quickly. That struck her as odd. She followed behind slowly, her instincts quietly on alert. From the hallway, she saw him open the front door, and there she was, a woman. Around Claire's age, maybe a few years younger. She wore jeans, boots, and a long gray coat that clung to her from the wind outside. Her hair was perfectly in place, her lipstick soft but intentional. She smiled like she knew him well. Claire waited for an introduction, but none came. Mark turned to her after a long pause. "Claire, this is Jordan. She's an old friend. She's visiting town, and I told her she could stay here for a few nights." The words hit Claire like a cold gust. He hadn't mentioned any visitor. No warning, no question. Just a decision made without her. Still, Claire managed to smile. "Of course. Make yourself at home." Jordan nodded politely and stepped inside, wheeling a small suitcase behind her. Claire noticed how familiar she seemed, like she belonged in the space already, like she'd been there before. They made small talk over dinner. Mark and Jordan shared little stories from the past conferences, colleagues, cities Claire had never been to. Mark laughed easily. His face lit up in a way she hadn't seen in months. Jordan matched his energy effortlessly. She knew his timing, his humor. She even called him M at one point. A nickname Claire had never heard. Claire stayed mostly quiet, watching the rhythm between them. Something unspoken passed back and forth, and Claire felt like a guest in her own home. That night, as they all said goodnight, Claire climbed into bed while Mark stayed downstairs with Jordan. She lay on her side, eyes open in the dark, listening to the faint murmur of voices and laughter drifting up through the vents. She didn't say anything the next morning. Instead, she woke early and made coffee like always. Jordan joined her in the kitchen, barefoot and casual, like she'd always lived there. "Hope I didn't mess up the rhythm around here," Jordan said lightly. Claire smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Not at all. "We're not much of a rhythm lately." She didn't mean to say it, but it was true. The day passed quietly. Mark was more talkative than usual, at least with Jordan. They went on a walk together around the block to catch up. Claire stayed back, cleaning the already clean counters. Her hands moved with purpose, but her mind raced. This wasn't just a visit. There was history here, undeniable, alive. And standing in her kitchen when they came back, Jordan handed Claire a coffee from her favorite shop. "Mark told me this is your favorite." Claire took it, her fingers brushing Jordan's by accident. "Thanks," she said flatly. That was thoughtful. Didn't touch the drink. That evening, the house felt smaller. Claire excused herself early and went upstairs. She left them downstairs again, talking, laughing, living in some version of the past that Claire had never been part of. She pressed her pillow over her ears and closed her eyes. But the silence inside her was louder than their voices downstairs. She didn't cry, not yet. She didn't even feel angry, just numb. And tired. Tired of waiting for things to feel normal. Tired of being invisible in her own home. She remembered the early days with Mark when they stayed up late talking about dreams and books and music. When he couldn't wait to tell her about his day. When her laughter could light him up. That man hadn't been around in a long time. Now he lit up when someone else walked into the room. She didn't want to admit it, but she felt it deep in her gut. A shift, quiet one, but enough to know things were no longer what they seemed. Jordan was more than just a guest, and Claire. She had become a witness. Still, she said nothing. She let it all happen, because sometimes the truth doesn't arrive in words, it arrives in silence. In glances, in the heaviness of what goes unsaid. And Claire was learning that the hardest part of love is watching it turn. into something unrecognizable. The days after Jordan's arrival passed in a strange blur. The house, once a place of comfort for Claire, began to feel like a stranger's space. Jordan moved through it with ease, like she owned every corner. She laughed openly with Mark, finished his sentences, and slipped into routines that made Claire feel invisible. Claire tried to keep herself busy. She cleaned, cooked, and did laundry, pretending everything was normal. But the silence between her and Mark grew heavier, stretching across every room. The distance wasn't new, it had been building for months, but Jordan's presence made it impossible to ignore. At breakfast, Mark and Jordan exchanged glances that said more than words. Claire watched, holding her coffee, feeling like she was watching a play where she wasn't cast. Jordan asked Mark about old friends, inside jokes, and trips they had taken together. Mark's eyes lit up, and his voice softened when he spoke to her. Claire forced herself to smile. But inside, a quiet ache grew. It wasn't jealousy, not exactly. It was loneliness, the kind that comes when the person you love turns to someone else for the things you used to share. That afternoon, Claire sat in the living room, flipping through a photo album. Pictures of her and Mark smiling, holding hands, planning vacations. She traced the edges of the photographs with her finger, wondering when things started to unravel. When the laughter stopped being for her, Jordan came in, humming softly, and sat on the couch nearby. She looked at the album curiously. "You and Mark look happy here," she said gently. Claire nodded but said nothing. How could she explain the emptiness behind those smiles now? How could she tell a woman she barely knew that the man she loved was slipping away? That evening, Mark and Jordan stayed late in the kitchen, sharing wine and stories. Claire lay in bed alone, staring at the ceiling. Every laugh from downstairs felt like a reminder of how far apart they'd grown. She tried to tell herself it was just a visit, that Jordan needed a friend and Mark was only being kind. But the way Mark looked at Jordan, the way she leaned in close to him, it was more than kindness. Claire felt like an outsider in her own marriage. The next morning, Claire woke early. She found Mark already up, scrolling on his phone at the kitchen table. Jordan was in the shower. Claire took a deep breath and decided she needed to say something. Anything. But when Mark looked up and smiled, the words got stuck in her throat. "Mark," she began, her voice shaky. "How long has Jordan been staying with us?" He looked surprised. "A few days now. She had nowhere else to go." "But did you ask me first?" Mark shrugged, avoiding her eyes. "I didn't think it was a big deal." Claire felt a mix of hurt and frustration. The house wasn't just his. Their life wasn't his alone to decide. "I just wish you'd told me," she said quietly. He nodded, silent for a moment. "I know." Days passed. Claire watched the way Mark and Jordan's easy friendship grew. They finished each other's sentences, shared quiet jokes, and even exchanged looks that made Claire's stomach twist. One afternoon, Claire found Jordan in her bedroom, browsing through the closet. Jordan smiled apologetically. "I hope I'm not intruding. Just wanted to find a sweater." Claire didn't know what to say. She nodded, swallowing her discomfort. That night, Claire stayed up late. She couldn't stop thinking about the quiet changes in their home, about the way Mark's attention had shifted, about how Jordan fit in where Claire no longer felt welcome. She wondered if Mark even noticed what was happening. The truth was, Claire was scared. Scared that this wasn't just a visit, that Jordan wasn't just a friend, that everything she believed in their marriage, their life was unraveling. But she still said nothing. Instead, she held her silence like a fragile shield, protecting herself from a truth she wasn't ready to face. Each day, the walls seemed to close in. The house, once full of memories and love, felt cold and unfamiliar. Claire's heart ached with a longing she couldn't name. She wanted to talk to Mark, to demand answers, to fight for what they had lost. But every time she tried, the words dissolved into fear and doubt. So she waited, watched, and let it all happen, because sometimes pain is easier to bear when it's quiet. When it hides behind polite smiles and whispered good nights, Claire knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a journey she hadn't chosen but had to take. And as Jordan's presence grew stronger, Claire realized she was standing at a crossroads, one that would change everything she thought she knew about love, trust, and herself. The fourth night arrived like every other, quiet but heavy with tension. Claire stayed in bed, pretending to sleep while the voices downstairs floated up through the floorboards. Mark and Jordan were still awake, talking in low tones that carried just enough warmth to sting. Claire's mind was a storm. She had held back her feelings for days, trying to stay calm and strong, but the quiet was breaking her apart. She didn't want to confront Mark yet, didn't want to push him. Further away, but something inside her demanded answers. Early the next morning, before the sun fully rose, Claire found Mark in the kitchen. He was rinsing dishes in the sink, the silence between them thick and uncomfortable. She stood at the doorway, her heart pounding. "How do you really know her?" Claire asked, voice low but steady. Mark didn't look up immediately. He took a slow breath, then met her eyes. "We met at a work conference last year. She was going through a tough time and I wanted to help," he said. His tone was flat, but Claire could hear the weight behind the words. "Just a friend." Claire pressed gently. He hesitated. "Yes, but it's complicated." Claire's throat tightened. "Complicated how?" Mark leaned against the counter, running his hands through his hair. "I don't know how it happened. I wasn't looking for anything. But with her, I feel something I haven't felt in a long time." Claire swallowed the lump rising in her throat. "Do you still feel that way about me?" He looked away, silent. "I'm asking because I need to know," she said, voice trembling. Mark finally met her gaze. "I don't know if I do." The honesty hit Claire like a blow. She felt the room spin, her knees weak. But she stayed standing, fighting the urge to run, to scream, to cry. She remembered the years with Mark, the laughter, the plans, the quiet moments that felt like the whole world. And now that world was slipping through her fingers. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. "I was scared," he admitted. "Scared of hurting you. Scared of losing what we had." Claire's voice softened. "But silence hurts too." Mark nodded, eyes full of regret. "I never meant for this to happen." They stood there, two broken people, in a kitchen filled with the ghosts of what once was. For a long time, neither spoke. Finally, Claire said, "What do we do now?" Mark shook his head. "I don't know. I'm lost." Claire felt tears burn behind her eyes, but she blinked them away. She didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. Instead, she turned and left the kitchen, her heart heavier than ever. That day, Claire wandered through the house like a ghost. Everything felt different. The walls seemed to close in, the silence louder than any argument. She avoided Mark, needing space to think, to breathe, to figure out what she wanted. But the truth was clear. Their marriage was at a crossroads. That evening, Claire overheard Mark and Jordan talking in the living room. The warmth in their voices was unmistakable. It wasn't just friendship anymore. She felt a wave of pain so sharp she clenched her fists to stop from shaking. When Mark finally came upstairs, Claire was waiting. "Are you leaving?" she asked quietly. He looked at her, surprised. "What, Jordan?" she said. "Are you going to leave?" Mark sighed. "I don't know. I wish I had an answer." Claire looked away. "Because I need one." That night, Claire lay awake, thinking about everything she had lost and everything she still hoped to save. She realized love wasn't always enough. Sometimes it took honesty, courage, and the willingness to face the hardest truths. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't keep pretending. She needed to find herself again, if it meant losing him. The days after that tense conversation felt like walking through fog. Claire woke up each morning unsure what she would find. Would Mark still be there? Would Jordan still be in their home? The uncertainty was crushing. But amid all the confusion, one thing became clear. Claire could no longer live in silence or fear. She began to reclaim small parts of herself. Early morning runs around the neighborhood, a habit she'd let go years ago. Long walks with their dog, Max, where she let her thoughts wander without judgment. She reconnected with friends she had pushed away, accepting their invitations to coffee and laughter. Each step helped her breathe a little easier. Mark kept to himself mostly, avoiding deep conversations. The house felt quieter, but not in a peaceful way. More like a space waiting for a storm to break. Jordan was still there, her presence a constant reminder of what was breaking apart. One afternoon, Claire found Jordan in the garden, kneeling by the flower beds. For the first time, Claire saw softness in her. A woman who wasn't just a symbol of betrayal, but someone struggling too. "I never wanted to hurt you," Jordan said quietly when Claire approached. Claire nodded, unsure how to respond. There were no easy words for this tangled mess. But she wanted to believe that beneath the hurt was a chance for healing, even if it seemed impossible now. That evening, Claire sat down with Mark again. This time, the words came more easily. "We need to be honest," Claire said. "Not just with each other, but with ourselves. Where do we want to go from here?" Mark looked tired but nodded. "I'm willing to try if you are." Claire hesitated. Was she ready to forgive? Could they find a way back? She realized forgiveness wasn't about forgetting or pretending nothing had happened. It was about accepting reality and choosing to move forward. No matter how painful, they agreed to start counseling, something they'd postponed for too long. Talking to someone neutral, someone who could help them understand each other again. The process wasn't easy. There were tears, silences, and moments when both wanted to give up. But slowly, Claire saw glimpses of the man she once loved, kind, thoughtful, vulnerable. Mark also started to see Claire in a new light, not just as his wife, but as a person who deserved honesty and respect. The hardest part was rebuilding trust. It didn't come overnight. It came in small actions, showing up, listening, being present. Meanwhile, Jordan decided it was time to leave. She packed her bags one rainy morning, leaving the house quieter than it had been in weeks. Claire felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. The woman who had caused so much pain was gone, but the scars remained in the weeks that followed. Claire and Mark worked on their marriage like rebuilding a house after a storm, patching walls, cleaning debris, making plans for a new foundation. Claire found strength she didn't know she had. She learned that sometimes love means letting go, but also knowing when to hold on. One evening, after a long day of therapy and honest conversation, Claire and Mark sat on their porch swing. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over their neighborhood. Mark reached for Claire's hand. "I'm sorry," he said simply. Claire squeezed his hand back. "Me too." They didn't have all the answers, but they had each other. And sometimes that was enough to start again. Claire realized that life wasn't perfect and love wasn't always easy, but it was real, and in the end, that was what mattered most.